May 15th, 2024. Well, the long-awaited Russian major offensive, I believe, is now underway. And we've been, I think it kind of jumped off a little bit sooner than a lot of people expected, including and presumably the Ukrainian military. But it does look to be underway now. And we are, looking at the events that are so far, it's been a pretty small movement, really. A lot of them assess that right now what's really been committed across the Ukrainian border in the Kharkiv region is basically kind of a reconnaissance force leading elements that are moving out there. The main force apparently has not been committed yet. I haven't heard any reads on exactly what the weather conditions are there, but in terms of ground level, I mean, earlier in the spring, I think that Ukraine gets very muddy, and as we mentioned, I think in other videos, and that kind of inhibits off-road maneuvers of armored vehicles. But I guess we've reached a point now here. We've been about 5 days into this thing and going on to the sixth now. The Russians have made some moderate advances. I don't get the feeling that this is being held back as much by a lot of Ukrainian counterattacks, although there are some counterattacks happening, or really tough defensive positions, which seem to, in fact, not have been as good as expected. But apparently, just the fact that the new dynamic in this war is you don't try to do the classic maneuver warfare. You move slowly and carefully and secure yourself in every move and then move on to the next step. That this is anybody that rushes in tends to rush into an ambush or a drone attack or something. So that's kind of what we're seeing right now. And of course, the question is strategically, what is this all about? I think the main thing that's occurred here over the past 2 years is that the Russians have moved from a position of having inadequate forces to accomplish their missions to having essentially adequate forces now. And they are now beginning to use them. The weather conditions have improved to the point, and I think that the advances throughout the rest of the front line have been reached a point at which additional pressure is useful, because what this can do, I know there's been a lot of discussion about the idea, which may be part of it, to put a buffer zone up. Then it gets countered by arguments like, well, yes, but obviously with ATACMS missiles or even HIMARS, or maybe even other weapons, you could shoot into Belgorod from wherever the Ukrainians would be, even if you did have a 15-kilometer buffer zone. But the thing is, they only have a limited number of these advanced weapons, whereas from where they were, you could actually shell it with just conventional tube artillery if you wanted. So I think that's part of it, but I think there's more to it than that. I think this is the beginning of a major offensive to actually dramatically change the battlefield. Another thing to consider here is the fact that since the U.S. has finally approved its aid package, a $61 billion aid package, it's time for the Russians to get moving, because the Ukrainians are going to be getting stronger week by week as these new weapon systems are in and deployed. And the air defenses in many areas have been pretty well depleted. And so it would make sense for the Russians to pursue their offensive before additional air defenses can be brought in and become effective. And one video I saw that happened very early in this is the Ukrainians had brought in a anti-aircraft system and was immediately destroyed by a Russian attack. See, so before it even become operational, because until they actually can get operational and set up, they become quite vulnerable to attacks by, Lancet drones, for example, or artillery fire or airstrikes. And so I think that explains kind of what's going on at this present time. There have been a lot of advances in the southern region, but this war doesn't advance very rapidly. It advances slowly. And even where the fences are light, you can see that still isn't that fast. And right now, I think that in one of the cities up there that they're now getting into this urban warfare thing. It looks like they're making some pretty good progress. In fact, unlike what we were seeing in Bakhmut, which took almost forever to accomplish, it looks like the Russians are able to take cities mm, maybe in a matter of weeks now rather than a matter of months. And smaller ones, much these little villages, of course, they can be run over rather quickly. So that seems to be kind of what we're looking at here. But if you like these videos I've mentioned, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And of course, if you're not on YouTube but you're a regular member of Rumble, I do post there too under the same name. And also thanks to the 2 new subscribers. I appreciate that. So yeah, this is kind of what I see happening now. As to how fast things will advance, one thing I don't really foresee them doing is directly trying to take Kharkiv. I don't think they're going to do that because it's a big city, and basically, I don't think they want to make the mistake that the Germans made at Stalingrad. That's get bogged down in urban warfare. What I think is more useful as their advance continues would be to try to disrupt communication lines. And there's some discussion that this will be followed up potentially an attack in the Sunni region. And if they can penetrate the point where key rail lines are located and sever those lines and put them out of business, that'll have a big impact on the logistics of the whole kind of the north, I guess you'd call it, eastern sector of Ukrainian operations. And this has been an area where there's been almost a stalemate for some time between Russian and Ukrainian forces. But again, if Ukrainian forces are pulled off the front line to reinforce the Kharkiv region, then it becomes likely that the Russians will then be able to pursue attacks in other areas and will be able to make more significant advances and perhaps even get the ones in that immediate northeastern region just south of the Kharkiv Oblast, again, kind of a squeeze play and actually roll up some of that lines. I've kind of discussed that idea before. I've been waiting for a long time when they would try to initiate a new front in order to move into an area that isn't as heavily protected and defended. And one of the things that, given the lack of, the Ukrainians are now overstressed strategically, apparently, throughout the entire sector. So they're going to have to pull units out of other areas. And I hear that a lot of what they're doing is pulling subunits. So instead of sending out whole brigades, they may pull a company or maybe even a battalion out of a brigade and send it up to the Kharkiv region, but not the whole brigade. Because otherwise, let's say in some of the other battles that they're involved in down in Donbass, this Kharkiv, or how you pronounce it, that place, if they were to pull many of those units out of there, then the Russians would be able to probably advance and take the city a lot quicker. So the idea of pulling small units out, they will still have a substantial force there. However, the problem is what's going into the Kharkiv region will be a rather disorganized group of small units that don't have a established command structure. It'll have to be improvised, and that'll make them probably a lot less effective than having whole brigades. So this is, however, I guess some of these units can be attached to existing brigades in the region and perhaps reinforce them and give them more defensive capability. It also seems that the reports that there were a lot of misallocation of funds through the notorious Ukrainian, what we call it, corruption, and money was diverted from other things than building defenses. And the other argument is that Russian artillery attacks made it impractical for civilian workers to come in and build defensive positions because they would become under artillery fire. So probably, and airstrikes also. So probably the combination of all these factors has led to a fairly weak preparation for defense in the area. And so it looks to me like as the Russians deploy more and more of their available forces, they will probably be able to make some advances and create that disruption in logistics that they're seeking. Meanwhile, I think in other sectors they'll be more free to advance. Now, what will be a countervailing effect is as these Russian weapons come in, these ATACMS missiles. And there's some discussion. I know the British foreign minister shot his mouth off the other day and said, well, you guys can go ahead and attack Russia with these, the I guess what we're talking about, the areas that are internationally recognized as Russia, because with the British weapons, that'll be okay. I've seen one video that suggests the U.S. had concurred, although I haven't heard that officially yet. But that will probably lead to some escalation at some point. That's at some point. The Western strategy, I think, may end up with some um, bad effects for themselves. I don't know when. For the moment, Russia has been very careful, I think, on trying to escalate too far. And we've mentioned in a previous video back that they are beginning to maneuver around, I guess, and prepare for what they would have to do to use tactical nuclear weapons. Getting into the kind of training to do that and update their forces for that purpose. And as I said, I don't see at the present time that level of escalation happening. I know there was some threats made that maybe Britain might come under attack. Again, I'm not sure. We don't know what would really happen if Russia were to launch an attack on a NATO country, a base or something. I'm not talking about an invasion here. I'm talking about like blowing up a logistics base or an airfield or something like that. And the reason I would say this is we just don't know. I mean, how eager is NATO really to invoke Article 5? I believe doesn't that require a unanimous vote, I believe? Of course, you could have a coalition of the willing, how willing they are. But, I mean, for instance, U.S. troops have been attacked by Iran, and U.S. ships have been attacked by the Houthis, and we haven't done any dramatic action over it, And so we don't know how far they would go. I would tend to think they will still shy away from doing that, because the level of damage that would be done in these attacks is probably relatively low compared to the damage that could be done if you get into an escalating situation. I mean, the big fear I think Russia would have is two things: NATO air power and NATO naval power. I mean, naval power of NATO could be used to blockade Russian shipping and transfer of, kind of blockade the economy of Russia, at least in various sectors. Of course, that could have some impact on how the Chinese would react to that if that was done in the Pacific, because they are dependent to a great extent on Russian petroleum, for instance. And so but that would be something that Russia would probably be willing to take a few punches for to avoid that it going to that level. Although it's interesting that I just saw a video where that Russia is now developing and just tested one of their own marine drones. So these, the naval drones that have raised havoc with the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Apparently, Russia is now developing their own naval drone, and of course, the question is, what purpose do they have in mind for that? Well, maybe they've learned a lesson about how very expensive modern naval vessels can be destroyed by very cheap naval drones. So the naval blockade may not run into a classic response, but maybe a drone attack that would blow a frigate or a destroyer right out of the water. And, so, I mean, that's a development that seems to be also occurring. But I tend to think Russia is going to remain cool as long as these attacks remain relatively modest. But we're really playing with a very dangerous situation, in my opinion. And I think, and the strange thing is I don't believe that Russia has any intentions to invade Poland or the Baltic states at this point at all. And if it wasn't for our very hostile attitudes of trying to support, any kind of a escalation in this conflict, I think that this would be really out of the question. And so time will tell how this develops. I'm not sure really how eager. I know that there was a lot of the discussion of the French deploying troops seems to temporarily chilled off after the discussion of the Russians preparing for tactical nuclear weapons. But I've discussed that stuff a lot more, and I don't want to get in that depth. I have videos on that where I did get into that issue of what might happen in those scenarios. So anyway, that's kind of it for now. I expect that this is going to be not a blitzkrieg, but it's going to be an ongoing battle. I tend to think the two basic things that Russia will be trying to do is to ultimately get to the point where they can disrupt lines of communication or supply for the Ukrainian forces, and also to divert Ukrainian forces from the fronts where they've been fighting on so far up to this area in the north, so that Russia can more easily advance in the areas like Donbass and Zaporizhia and so forth. So we'll see what happens. That's about it for this time, and I will, of course, be posting this on Rumble as well as YouTube, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below. All for now.